Investing Insights with Right Property Group, exploring trends in real estate and helping property investors gain financial security.
Welcome everybody to another episode of Investing Insights with Steve Waters and Victor Kumar from Right Property Group. Vic, welcome back.
Thank you.
Or welcome us back.
Welcome us back.
I just said that like I'm the only one that was here and you're always the guest. Truth be known, I'm the guest.
That's it.
Vic just doesn't like doing the introduction. I don't think you've ever done an intro.
No, I have never done an introduction.
Maybe next time you can.
Usually what happens is that you grew up on a farm, right? So it's the, the prize stallion comes in later.
There's so much I could say there, but I won't. The word prize and stallion and Victor doesn't seem to go together. Maybe we should do another podcast just around that subject. We'll make it a fireside chat. Actually, as I digress from the original digress, we're going to do the fireside chat. So somewhere in the very near future, it'll be around winter, so we can have literally a big fire. We'll set the cameras up, obviously the recording gear and everything like that, and we'll have a few special people come along where we're going to be totally relaxed.
Just chewing the fat.
Around a fire out in the middle of somewhere, and but the same flavour, I guess, but in a much more relaxed environment. I'm really looking forward to that.
Yeah, and you're bringing the wine.
I'm not, but I know who is. It got better taste.
So you better make sure we invite him then, right?
Oh, they know about it. Everyone's keen to do it, so stay tuned, everybody, because we're super keen for that. It obviously, once again, it'll be filmed, so I don't know. I've seen a few people do that, especially in the States, not in and around property, just different subjects, and it looks really inviting. Yeah, you can't help but watch it, I guess.
Yeah.
Raw, unedited, as these are. Nonetheless, something to look out for sure. Well, Vic, there's a lot of news, same old news, I guess. We've
rates
seen
on their way up.
Yeah, rates are on their way up again. Cash rates called, it's up, and no doubt the certain elements of the media will be all over that and predict doom and gloom.
As they usually do.
As they usually do. And look, to be fair, I think we need to call it how it is. There are certainly some parts of the market that are suffering, and it almost becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
If there's enough negative news in the media, everyone latches onto it, and that's the new truth.
Well, it is. And the more people that do it, and it becomes reality, I guess. Now, that's also taking into account that there have been some elements of the market that have overperformed well and truly. Well in excess of historical averages times 3, and that's not healthy. So whether we get a contraction in certain elements of the market around the country, and mainly at this point in time it's around Sydney and Melbourne, and whether the others will follow is yet to be seen. Like, we have our own thoughts on that, and so far we've been very accurate and very correct, I guess.
Because it's all cyclical.
Well, it is, and this isn't the first time this has happened. And I think people need to get a grip and just look back in the cyclical nature of this particular asset class and what drives it for the most, and realise it's just another stage. Yeah, it's another season, and it doesn't mean that all markets react the same way. We've just come out of a market where all markets were north, which was highly unusual to have all markets doing the same thing. That's not the usual. Yeah. And now we are getting back to relevance and to a more usual market based on historical trends and the cyclical nature of the asset once again. But it doesn't mean that all markets are going to be suffering. But what it does mean, Vic, is that there will definitely be some opportunities that present themselves in the market, and it'll be state-based to some degree, but it's going to be history repeating itself.
Yeah, and this is not just us trying to, talk up the market or talk up the situation. That's how it actually unfolds. That as seasons change, as the cycles change, you get new opportunities come up, and you need to put yourself in the position to actually recognize those opportunities, because sometimes, usually most times, opportunities come wrapped up in problems, and you need to
Perceived
know
problems.
how to solve those problems to get to the opportunity.
And that's a really good point that you made about a minute ago around that the opportunities that we will see in today's market and tomorrow's market are not the same opportunities that we've seen in the last 12, 24 months or thereabouts. And it is just the usual pattern of what the asset does through different monetary environments, as well as what the consumer flavour is at that point in time.
Yep.
But there will definitely be these opportunities. But as we said, this is not we're not trying to be those property guys who are just talking about rivers of gold throughout all sectors, because we're definitely not saying that.
There will be some hurt.
There will be some hurt, absolutely. We've already seen some hurt, and I would imagine that there'd be some continued contraction in the asset value of some areas. But as we say, there'll also be, on the other side of the ledger, there'll be some very good opportunity in and around. That doesn't mean waiting for the bottom of the barrel or the bottom of the cycle to jump back in. These particular opportunities, as you say, may be dressed as a problem.
Yeah, perceived problems.
Yeah, as opposed to what they really are, and that is potentially an opportunity. So there's 4 or 5 of those that we see happen all markets, and we'll give you examples. Actually, how about we do that?
Yeah.
From yesteryear, same sort of flavour, same sort of monetary environment.
And the reality is that, we actually thrived, the last tangible crisis we had. There's many crises in between. But during the GFC, we were buying up a storm.
Loved it. In an ethical way.
Yes.
Of course. But as we've said before, crises come and go, and there is always one. Every couple of years, it's just a different type of crisis. So to repeat ourselves, obviously we've got inflation and higher cost of money now. We've had COVID, another crisis. Before that, we had APRA. Before that, we had the GFC. And I'm going to miss out some mini crisis along the way. And before the GFC, we had the end of the loose credit environment.
And prior to that, we had the recession.
Yeah, and it goes on and on and on. So there's always a crisis somewhere around the corner. It's just how do we prepare for it, and how do we act in amongst it to set ourselves up for the next upward swing.
Yeah, you said something really pertinent, right? It's how to prepare for it, because in this phase of the cycle, the investors, the purchasers, the home purchasers that are actually prepared to take advantage of this market will absolutely come out shining on the other end, as opposed to the unprepared will be then battened down by the negative media, the spiraling interest rates upwards, and therefore the cost to hold properties, because they've left the run a bit too late. Now, I'm stressing it's still not too late, right? Even though we've had interest rate rises left, right, and center, and more flagged at this stage. If you address, like we keep saying, address the fundamentals, know your cost to operate, knowing the cost to operate of not just the portfolio but your entire household budget, you can certainly set aside contingency funds. You can then liquefy your equity and be ready to pounce on the opportunity. It will usually be too late to pounce on the opportunity when you're trying to start from a standing stop.
2 very important points here. One, cost to operate, which is something that we've talked about for many years, not just the segmented cost to operate of the portfolio, but of your life. So the household budget, very, very important. And the second one is preparation. And if we even go back, 6 of these ago, where we banged on about liquidity, then go back, every second podcast, Facebook Live conversation that we've had over the last 5 years about liquidity. Those that are, and it's not too late to be liquid now. It's getting harder, but it's not too late.
Yep.
Those that have met that preparation box, so to speak, will be in the box seat to be able to move forward. If you continue to purchase, worst case, you're going to have some fantastic sleep at night money, just so that between your ears you're comfortable, which is half the battle.
Yes,
a lot of the time is trying to go against what you read in the media, on the social media profiles and what have you, from every would-be, could-be analyst
Yep.
is to actually go against the grain if you deep down don't believe it. Now, there are times when I believe they're going to be right, and some of them are right now. But there's a big cohort that aren't, that are just putting words on paper or on a screen to create the hoo-ha
Yep.
to sell the advertising space. Now, I'm being very broad and general there. Not all journalists are that way inclined. However, unfortunately, the majority of the public follow that narrative. And we're seeing that right now. Like, you think about it, if you're under no economic hurt now, why would you sell?
Exactly right.
And if
knowing your numbers.
Yeah, and if you knew your numbers and you knew that you could sustain whatever the future holds, throws at us over the next couple of years, and you knew that property is a long-term asset class and that over time, because you've selected a good area, that it will do well, why would you sell now? Unfortunately, there's going to be a big group of people that do.
Yeah, it's the uninformed and perhaps, let's take a step back, right? The first time an interest rate rises when after a long period there hasn't been an interest rate rise, the first tranche of properties that do come on the market are your profit takers. You know, they are the people that perhaps want to get rid of a dog property, or they just want to batten down the hatches or sell their investment properties to pay down their home loan. So there's usually a flush of properties in the market, and then it peters down. But when you get your follow-on interest rate rises, that's when the panickers and the can't hold ons put their properties on the market.
It'll be interesting to see whether there is a group of people that can't hold on, so to speak. The reason I say that is because for the first time in a long time, some would say history, we are further in front of our mortgages.
Absolutely.
Collectively than we ever have been, thanks to, as we've discussed before, products like the offset facility and the like. We're at very low credit card debt, lowest since the 70s, I believe. Conversely, though, we've got higher inflation, we've got higher cost of goods and services, so that will start to erode that back-end budget, so to speak, of the household. But where and when and if we start to see that household hurt and the necessity to sell the assets. Now, you could go right down a rabbit hole with that and say, okay, well, the home is a different story, but what happens if they own a home and 2 investment properties?
Yep.
And they feel the hurt, they'll sell the investment properties before they sell the home, or whatever it may look like to them. But you're right, what we do see is, and it's the first time in a long time we've seen interest rate rises, so there's the profit taker, so we see a flurry of property on the market in certain areas as people look to take potentially profit or to mitigate what they perceive may happen in the future. Then it'll peter off as people become used to the current interest rate environment, as long as we don't keep getting 25, 40 basis points every single month. There will be a point where it will stop. Nobody knows that point in time yet. But I believe people will become used to the new cost to money.
Yeah.
Let's be relevant here. We're not at 9%.
No. And the reality was that just at the tail end of GFC, the standard rate was 9%.
I remember, I don't know if I said this in the last podcast or the last Facebook Live. I was doing a review with a client and we were just prepping up, I think it was last month, to purchase again. And the office sent through the pre-approval, but it was the wrong pre-approval. It was from 2019, early 2019. And the particular client got a 88% loan-to-value ratio plus LMI product, interest only, 5 years, and it was 4.5%. This is early 2019, and we were super, as investors, we were super happy with that cost of money, especially if you had a few properties. Yeah, that was a decent...
Yeah, it was a decent rate.
It was a decent rate, right?
So we're not even there yet.
It's only early, it was early 2019, so it wasn't that long ago.
And we were fixing at 4.99s and turning cartwheels on it.
I know, I remember that. If I get 4.99 interest only, I've never seen that. I'm going to take a whole heap of it, and we did. But it being only 3 years ago or thereabouts and 4.5%, look what has happened in 3 years or thereabouts. A hell of a lot. And what will happen in the next 3 years will be similar. Yeah. A hell of a lot will happen. And what tomorrow holds in terms of, and tomorrow in real estate is years, no one knows.
No one knows.
No one knows what the credit policy will be. No one knows what the financial environment will be, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So trying to get out of a market now to run to the hills with your tail between your legs is just simply foolish if you don't have the hurt that where you need to sell. And if you do have the hurt, well, then perhaps you haven't prepared correctly. So let's talk about where we believe the opportunities for tomorrow are going to be based on what we've seen over the last 22 years or thereabouts. And the first one for me is going to be the properties that are cosmetically challenged.
Yep.
And you could even sort of throw in some stuff there, the next level up over and above cosmetically challenged properties to potentially small structural scenarios as well. I'm not talking about collapsed properties. Yeah, it might be just a half complete thing or something like that. So traditionally what we've seen is as the market tightens and as credit becomes harder to get, and in this case it'll be via serviceability calculations and the cost of money clearly, we find that the properties that are cosmetically challenged tend to have less of an absorption rate. And what I mean by that is they hang on the market for longer because as capital becomes a premium, so to speak, there is therefore less of it. People don't have the ability or want to use large portions of capital to buy a property and then have to fund a renovation. Then you overlay the construction industry at the moment and trying to get trades and materials and what have you. It's going to become more and more of a don't wanna.
Yep. So there'll be less people vying for it.
Correct. And we see this time and time again at this stage of the market. And once again, this will be state, territory, city, region, and even potentially suburb driven as well, where you will see these properties start to linger on the market for longer and therefore become more negotiable.
Yes.
And even they may not get to the market. It may be a scenario where the agents are starting to trying to sell them as a pre-market opportunity so that they don't stay on the open market for long periods of time.
And we are seeing that right now with the number of calls we're fielding from the agents that they are seeing how the market's going to pan out and they're being proactive and reaching out to us quite early in the piece. Whereas just 3 months ago, we're not even hearing from them, we're not even returning phone calls because the market was pretty buoyant. The rates weren't on the run. And it's a matter of understanding that the agents will try and help out the vendor because by selling the property, that's how they earn their income. And so they'll do anything within their means to get a reasonable price for the vendor. And hence, this is where we come in terms of reasonable price does not necessarily mean top price. It means actually getting rid of the property itself as well.
And the reasonable price may be dictated by the circumstances. So even though the property in this example might be a don't wanna.
Yep.
It doesn't necessarily mean that the vendor is their backs against the wall. The seller, the vendor, their backs against the wall, and they have to sell. It just might be a thorn in their side, and they want to sell. And the market will dictate what the price is. Now, if it is something that is cosmetically challenged, then there needs to be a discount.
Absolutely.
And the discount, and this is where but having said that, investors need to be very, very careful that they're not sugarcoating the numbers. Just because it's a discount of X% doesn't necessarily make it a good opportunity. So there's a whole heap of calculus in the background, or DD, due diligence, feasibility study and the like, to determine whether the property is still going to be profitable for you. Now, some of the other things that you need to be aware of when you look for those types of properties are the council regulations.
Not biting off too much to chew.
Correct. Right. Timelines, capital requirements, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a whole heap of diligence that you need to do in the background to make sure that you're not just going through the motions and buying yourself a job to be in a net neutral position. You need to be turning a profit. And I'm not talking about selling. I'm talking about a paper profit, essentially,
that's right.
a value proposition. But it will be reliant, I believe, as it always is at this time of the cycle, upon the relationships with the agents. Now, the agent's job is to do the best thing by the vendor, but sometimes the best thing to do by the vendor is to sell it at a price, to move it on, and get some cash in the bank for whatever the reason may be.
So when you look at it, right? So I guess the question is, why wouldn't we buy these sort of properties during a boom time? Yes, you can. And this is more skill set based as well, because we have bought properties in the last couple of years where they needed substantial renovation. But often at those times, you'd want the market to do the heavy lifting, right? Because it's on its strong run up. Why tinker too much with the property itself? Now, as the market turns, these properties, whilst they were still good back then, become excellent now. Because you're able to protect your deposit going in, provided you've done the due diligence up ahead. And we're not getting into a flip situation of renovating and selling and walking away with the profit. What we're trying to do is push the value up significantly or sufficiently enough so that if you did run into trouble, you've still got an out, right? Because we need to take an approach that anything that we're buying in the next, say, year, 2 years may go sideways or downwards slightly. And life always has different challenges thrown at us. So we always take an approach for your entire portfolio to say, okay, if life turned pear-shaped, how are we going to extract ourselves out? And it might not be the property that we're buying, but against the entire portfolio, how it fits in so that the liquidity is maintained, the equity position is maintained, and we're not slipping back into significant negative equity. And across the portfolio, we are always above the line, as opposed to living in fear to say that if things went pear-shaped, I'll be selling at a big loss.
Very good point. And what we're not doing is take the cash flow scenario into account here. We're just talking about the value proposition as opposed to the cash flow, which is another podcast in itself. I want to say something though, and it sounds like I'm going to contradict myself somewhat. There's a very good chance that there will be segments of the market that act similar to what happened during the GFC, and I'm talking about the absorption rate. So the amount of properties that come onto the market, how long they sit there before they are absorbed/purchased. Now, there are certain elements of the market during the GFC that were, or other crises for that matter, where listings were softer.
Yeah.
In other words, there weren't as many properties on the market during a time of perceived grief as there was to a time of buoyancy. So people are buying, selling, buying, selling, buying, selling, or selling, buying, selling, buying. So therefore the turnover is a lot greater than what it has been during softer times, because if there's not the economic hurt to warrant putting the property on the market, and people, I believe, are far more sophisticated and educated today, then why would they? So there's a real chance that the good areas people will retain.
It won't be on sale.
It won't be on sale, and there won't be this flood of over and above historical listing volumes because there's not the hurt to do so.
Exactly right.
Now, on the other side of the ledger, there will be areas that will. And I guess you could use the beginning of COVID or the first year or thereabouts as an example and take, say, the unit markets where you couldn't rent them and you couldn't give them away, and in good areas, and now you can't find one to rent or one to buy. Yeah,
how quickly did that turn?
Yeah, and we're only talking, 3 years? So that goes back to what I said earlier on. 3 years is 100 dog years in real estate. It's a hell of a long time. The days are short, the years are long.
Yep.
So it'll be interesting to see what happens. I actually believe, tying into the point around the types of opportunities in and around renovations that present themselves, they won't be abundant. They'll be there, but there's not going to be hundreds of them.
Yep, and you need to be able to snap them up as quickly as possible, because this is where people that are prepared and the vendors, they taking an offer that's on the table right here, right now. Now, one of the metrics that in this market doesn't quite have as much relevance as it does in other markets is days on market. Because a lot of times as the market is changing, the vendors haven't caught up to the agent messaging, what the general public perception is on that area and where the values really sit. So it tends to stay on the market longer, and you can't use that as a metric to decide on an area if there is going to be prolonged days on the market, where the days on market is increasing, because it's a transfer of knowledge at that time.
100%. That's a really good point, because, I'll exclude sort of one-trick pony towns from what I'm about to say. Yep. Let's just talk about good, solid areas, major metropolitan areas or commutable distance too. I think days on market are more relevant in a buoyant market
Absolutely. Yeah.
than what they are in a softer market. Because of the agent messaging in a softer market, because of perhaps vendors, sellers still having their head in the clouds as to where the value sits. At the end of the day, a property will sell at what the market believes is value.
And what else it's competing against.
Correct. Whereas in a buoyant market, things are just selling.
Yep.
Because of FOMO. People will pay whatever they need to. Forget value, forget where value really sits. It's just, I want in the market and I'll pay whatever I can afford to get in.
Yep.
So the days on market are very important then. I don't believe they're as important, generally speaking, in a softer market, because there are way too many variables there in relation to the data that is open for interpretation. And depending on what filter you put on it will be the Dr. Google answer that you're looking for.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Now the other thing is, as you look at the bell curve, right? So as the market goes up, right, and the market's coming down to its tail, right? So as it starts going up, one of the things that you battle is the valuation from the bank, because they haven't kept up as to how fast the market is shifting, and they're saying, I don't know whether this trend will last, so they tend to devalue, so undervalue. So we find at that point in time, so this is the beginning of a bull run, right? The valuations don't stack up. So you may be paying, say, as an example, 800K for a property, valuation comes in at 750, and then you have to battle it and then give different comparables to the valuer. In most cases, the valuer is not going to move their valuation because that's their reputation on the line. So you may have to go to a different lender in that sense. Now, when you go to the other side of that, the bell curve, now we're at the bottom end of the market, potentially the bottom, the bottom end of the curve, right? So it's gone to its peak and it's now starting to come down. Now, the lenders aren't sure and the valuers aren't sure. Don't know where it's going to end up. So we get the same problem again, where the valuations might not stack up, and we're also compounding that problem by targeting a property that's cosmetically challenged. So what will usually happen is that your valuer may say, yeah, you know what, 800K, yeah, I agree with that. However, it needs 50K worth of repairs, so I'm going to devalue it by 50K. So it's 750 is what I recommend you lend it at against. And if they do X number of items, then we'll push it up to 800.
Or we've also seen in the past where the valuer has said we want to see a builder's quote.
Builder's quote, yeah.
Yeah, which is good luck in today's environment.
Yeah, and the bank may say, yes, we'll fund it at 800. However, we'll withhold the money that's on the quote until you do the works.
Correct.
So this is where being prepared comes in, because you need to have money in your coffers to facilitate for that.
So what we're really talking about today are the people that are prepared. So the ones that have become liquid, that have the borrowing capacity, that where these types of challenges in and around valuations or LVR positions aren't going to be
an issue
in the scheme of things. Yeah. So this isn't for everybody, and let me stress that the opportunities that we believe that it will present themselves over the next 12, 18 months or thereabouts are not for everybody.
Yeah.
Are not for everybody.
For some of you, you might have to actually sit this one out.
Correct, and that might be the smartest thing to do. So let's go to the next one that I believe will be an opportunity, and you and I personally have bought a hell of a lot of these over the years, and that is the constructions or renovations that are 80, 90, 95% complete.
So just only weeks away from the occupation certificate.
Yeah, or some larger, some months away from the finishing of construction, as it is. And I remember during the GFC where we bought heaps.
Yeah, we bought heaps. Yeah.
Like, might have been a row of townhouses that come to mind that were 99% complete at mortgagee and possession auction, or renovations that were
half complete.
So they'd stripped out everything, grand desires and dreams on what to do, and then ran out of capital, weren't prepared, moved on, and we would clean up the renovation, or even just house and land scenarios where the builder's gone broke, but all the certification and certificates were in place, or whatever it may be. Now, the reason why I think that that's going to be almost a reality in some circumstances is just because of the construction industry and the way it is at the moment. As we all know, there's a lot of builders that are doing it tough, large, medium, small, and someone's got to take those projects over. Now, obviously, if ProBuild up on the Gold Coast or wherever it was with 300 things under construction, that we're not large enough to go out and take that out, nor would I want the headache, to be honest with you. But just the individuals, I believe. And if a construction or the completion of a construction is above your pay grade,
don't get into it.
Maybe start with the half renovated properties or whatever it may be. But I think that's going to be, for the larger investors and in their real sense, the sophisticated consortiums, so to speak, I think there's going to be quite, not a lot, but there'll be some of that via the liquidators administrators that the general public, unless you're looking for, won't know.
Yeah, so how do these properties come about? It's through three reasons, right? Lack of funding, lack of will, or lack of relationships. So as the money becomes hard, relationships break down, business relationships, personal relationships. So these properties then come up on the market. And usually these, if it's a mortgagee in possession, usually goes to an auction. And depending on how the market pans out, may not sell at the auction, and they are then highly negotiable because the market has spoken, so to speak. This is where usually you're going in on a 30-day contract because the bank is keen to get onto their money. A lot of times the bank might not, if it's in mortgage insurance territory, the bank might not be as pedantic about how much they sell the property for, within reason. They still have to sell it for actual market value, perceived market value. This is where the poor borrower is then pursued by the mortgage insurer for the balance of the funds. So when you get into a market like this, it's highly negotiable again. And this is where sometimes people start chasing perceived profits without doing the full due diligence because they seem to be getting a bargain because it's a mortgage in possession.
Correct. And so this particular strategy, if you will, in and around the completion of developments or large renovations is not for the faint-hearted. It is for the sophisticated and experienced investor that has the will, has the means, has the funding and the skill set
to see it through.
If you don't and you take on something like this, you are speculating.
Yeah.
And that's not what you want to be
No,
doing
not
with
in this market.
And with a half-built sort of article at the end of the day. But it's certainly it can be a profitable scenario, but go into it with your eyes wide open.
That's right. I guess you can see the flavor over here, right? So this is where it's more hands-on investing now, as opposed to more passive investing of the yesteryears where the market is shifting upwards. Because what we're trying to do is step aside from your novice investors and novice buyers to focus on properties that will give you real opportunity, real growth. And the growth is either manufactured or stabilized via renovation. It's either manufactured because of the buying, so we bought it well. So nothing wrong with the property, pristine property, but it's just hugely motivated. They need to sell to protect other business assets or other properties. They will come.
Yep. And I think you've made a really important point there between the passive investor and not.
Mm-hmm.
So the one that's more involved. And there are certain markets will dictate what you can do within the market. So when you have a market that's having a bull run, you don't need to do a hell of a lot other than control the opportunity.
Yes.
And the market will lift itself. But in a market that is potentially, let's call it sideways, that in certain areas, you need to be involved. So you are manufacturing the position as opposed to...
Or stabilizing it.
Yeah, correct. Now, that's for the investor that kind of wants a short-term result in terms of whether it be the cash flow position or the equity position. But equally for the passive investor, when you have a sideways market or a contracting market, it also gives you a good opportunity as the passive investor, if you can get finance, because that's what's going to drive the market somewhat or a lot, that you get to have more choice of controlling the good opportunity for the future when the market sort of recycles itself and gets into a more normalized situation. So you don't have to be one or the other. It's just that in these types of markets, the active investor really licks their lips.
they benefit most.
Correct.
Yeah. So I guess, if you're a first-time investor, you're sort of listening to this and thinking, "Oh my God, there's so many moving parts. I don't know. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to renovate." We need to understand the mechanics behind this, right? So when you look at decision making, people make the decisions based on sight and smell. So if the property is unkempt, overgrown lawns, what we call the grandmother plants in the front yard, or it's just dirty dishes piled in the sink, really cosmetically challenged but structurally sound, people tend to discount it, right? Because they can't see they can't see themselves solving the problem, whereas that problem is very easy to solve, right? Let's say it hasn't been painted for 20 years and it's all flaking, very easy to solve that problem. Smell, it could be that, let's say it had a leaking sewer pipe underneath the house, or it's got the animals inside the house that it's got that peculiar smell, right? It's not pleasant. The reality is that these problems are easy to solve. So for the first-time investor to get into a renovation type properties, what we normally do is we graduate you to the bigger renovation. So you start small, just a paint and carpet, which is very easy to organize.
Haircut and a shave.
Haircut and a shave is what we call it. Right? And I remember, might as well bring Smith Street up where we just mowed the lawns.
Yeah. That's true.
That was during the GFC, and that made money straight away.
Yeah. I remember that. That was literally, it wasn't even a real mow. It was whippersnip.
Whippersnip.
Yeah.
Because the lawn was so overgrown but everything else was fine on that property.
And that's an example of that was a mortgagee in possession.
Mm-hmm.
That was a don't wanna.
Yep.
And fast forward, I think that was 257,000. This is
Mm-hmm.
testing my memory. And today, so that was a GFC. So what? Call a year.
20 years. Yeah.
No, 20 years.
Yeah, almost. 10 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
God. It was Victor's birthday.
Being with you, Steve, it seems like it's decades.
Because time flies when you're having fun, Vic.
Is that what it is?
But you fast forward that property today, and it's over $800,000.
Yeah.
Now, there's a combination of the way it was bought, the market timing, clearly, but also
the area,
the manufactured equity, and then just the organic component to it. They were good times. I don't think we're going to be anything like that this time around, but I suppose what we're trying to do is we're trying to paint a picture that there is always opportunity no matter what the market is doing.
And no matter what your experience is.
Correct. If you want it.
Yeah.
If you don't, then sit on your hands and do nothing. If you can't, then sit on your hands and do nothing, because sometimes that's the smartest thing to do. All right, let's get to the next let's get to the next opportunity where we see there could be upside. And it follows the same flavour as the other two pieces, and that is land.
Mm-hmm.
Because, and this will be something that is actually unique to this set of circumstances as opposed to what we've seen in the past. Yeah. And that is, as we've mentioned before, we're at the end of the funding cycle. We've got construction issues, bottleneck supply issues, labour shortage, consumer sentiment in and around that space, that you might start to see land being recycled from people that have bought it that now can't build on it.
Because they can't qualify for
Because they can't qualify for the finance, nor can they get a construction company. And that whole sort of self-fulfilling scenario happens. And so the land might become a don't wanna as well. But word of caution, be extremely selective around, if you're going to go down that path, extremely selective, because you still have the same problems as they do. Finding a builder, potentially the capital, potentially the funding. There's no real incentive because there's no income off it if you're looking for a tax
So it
strategy.
impacts your borrowing capacity as well?
Yep, 100%. However, if it's a good opportunity in a good location with good square meterage and good fundamentals and good, and you can, because you're cashed up, you're liquid, or you have
the ability to hold
on to it, there could be some opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. So you need to take that approach to say that, you know what, you're not going to be able to build this cycle, right? So you need to get the cycle back up to the top before you can start building, because money will be freer There'd be more construction companies around. So all of this crisis, the bottleneck would be gone, right? So I guess the question is, how long is this cycle going to be? I think it's going to be fairly short.
Yeah, I actually do too. I think it'll be. I think the rate cycle will be shorter than what it has been historically.
So historically, high interest rate climbs after it reaches its height, holds for about 18 months, then it starts dropping, right?
Correct.
But I think it'll be faster than that. We'll reach the height a lot quicker and drop a lot quicker as well.
Yeah, and there's a million reasons for it, which we won't go into all of them. But as we've mentioned before, the whole worldwide economy is in a checkmate position.
Mm-hmm.
Damned if you do and damned if you don't. And there is some real potential inflection points out there which will warrant the necessity to drop interest rates somewhere in the...
Or make borrowing much more easier.
Yeah, either way. Same result, actually, because
Yeah.
as we've said, that's a good point, because as we've said before, it's not so much the cost of money that is the be-all and end-all, it's the flow of credit. It's the how easy is it for me to borrow money.
Yeah, even at 5%, there was plenty of properties changing hands, and that was a buoyant market.
As I've mentioned a gazillion times before, but for the new listeners, I had properties double at 9% in 12 months.
Yep.
It's the cost of money was escalating back then, but the flow of credit.
Yeah, it's the availability.
Correct. So the most recent example of that, just to remind everybody, was back when APRA pulled the handbrake.
Yes.
Side note, there's talk of that again.
Mm-hmm.
It which would be suicidal. Like they just APRA, you don't learn. It call me. It's
1-800-STEVE.
Yeah, there are so many other. Anyway, get off the box, Steve. So it'll be the flow of credit that could potentially change everything up on its head, in combination with the shorter rate cycle. So we think, you and I both, I think we're on the same page here, that this rate cycle, therefore, the value proposition will be shorter than most, because let's not forget the major piece here. Who's going to put a roof over everybody's head, as we keep talking about?
Yeah.
And so too does every other media organisation now. So too is the government recognising it, state and federally, and everybody. I mean, every week, every day, there's a bad news story about someone having to live in a tent or in a caravan park or whatever it may be, and that is sad, very, very sad. And the only way that will be fixed is via supply.
Build more properties, make properties more available.
And so if you loosen supply or create supply, which will help the problem first and foremost, people have got to be in a position to be able to activate that supply. In other words, buy it to rent it, buy it to build it, buy it to live in it. That requires funding. So it actually needs the bookend approach via supply and funding. And then you'll go some way towards rectifying the problem, which then also ties back in, doing the full lap, the full circle, in terms of why we think it's a different flavour this time around, is because of all these different components which have never come together like this before. And ultimately, because of the lack of accommodation, that is going to underpin a lot of Australia in terms of the value proposition because of the increasing cash flow. Therefore, not making the environment to not be able to sustain the property and have to sell.
Yeah.
So it's a completely different set of metrics. But anyway, land, come back to that. So land, once again, not for the faint-hearted.
And that includes acreage as well.
Well, if you come back to supply, right, and you control the land, he, she with the most land wins.
Yes.
At the end of the day.
At the right location.
In the right location, So if you could control the land for tomorrow, you're in a very, very good position. And that might be control the land with an existing dwelling on it, so a larger block, acreage, and whatever it may be. And those that sort of know us and our clients know that we love our acreage very much. And you could actually bring that into it, as you say, that acreage is usually the last thing to go up and the first thing to go down.
That's it.
COVID, it was a little bit different because everybody ran to the hills and wanted to be doomsday preppers and grow your own carrots and potatoes and have your own eggs. So let's go out and get acreage and live a sustainable lifestyle, but that's not reality. So acreage did very, very well during COVID, and it's holding. It's holding very well. But that's not any acreage. So that means the acreage that you want is for the future. So it's a generational piece or a legacy piece that doesn't go underwater, that doesn't have power lines, that doesn't have mining subsidence, that doesn't have all these other warts on it for the future, but high cost of entry.
That's it. And especially in a climate we're getting into right now, the lenders may reduce the loan to value ratio on these properties.
Correct. So it is a bigger barrier to entry. Higher price, lower LVR.
Sucks up all of your capital.
Sucks up your cash flow. There's a lot of moving sort of negative parts to acreage. So that's why you usually see the people that, the developers that control acreage, they control it for many, many years via an option, which I don't recommend doing unless you really have some sophistication behind you. The next one, Vic, which will go against the grain a little, I believe, and there'll be people out there that go no way to this, and that is the multi-front door dwellings.
Yes.
So the blocks of units. Now, I'm not talking about the 20-storey, 100-unit complexes. I'm talking about the small 4-packs, 5-packs, 6-packs, anything that really
still in the residential lending
is in the residential space and not the commercial space. Now, people that know us know that we love that as well.
So this is on a single title.
Single title, if you can get them, so those smaller complexes where you control all the square meterage and all the front doors, and therefore all the streams of income. And the upside to them is via strata titling when the time is right, maybe some renovation. So it's really a combination of all of what we've just talked about, the prior 3-4 points. So multiple streams of income, all square meterage, well located, renovation, strata titling. So council integration, I guess. Now that's certainly not for everybody again. And I find that the most profitable blocks of units are the ones that usually take the longest to get. So that it's a patience.
Yes.
It's a patience scenario, because what usually happens in a buoyant market, void of COVID, is that you get the listed and unlisted property trusts that really compete for those, and they've got very deep pockets. So it makes it it's not viable for people like us, the normal mum and dad investor, to be able to compete with them and their deeper pockets. But when you're going against the grain of market sentiment, the time to control those opportunities.
You're being counter-cyclical.
Right. Correct, because then it becomes, and once again, this is not for everybody, so this is probably a next level up again, this podcast, in terms of what we usually talk about, but I think it's something that we should do.
Generally, a property like that, you're talking 60-65% loan-to-value ratios on those. Occasionally, you get your 80%, but you got a budget for your 60-65s, and the lenders are fairly limited in terms of who will take these on. Which is all the more reason why, take heed of liquefy all of your equity now, so you can take advantage of something like that. Because if you've got a large enough deposit, who cares what loan to value ratio the bank's going to give you, within reason, of course, because you're controlling the opportunity. When the market turns, the market becomes buoyant, you can restructure that mortgage back to your 80% of or 60% of the new value if you're still keeping it with the same lender, and claw all of your money back out and give some serious cash flow. And also it gives you several outs from that property, strata titling, renovation, you name it.
Yeah, I think, so the multi-front door, so block of units, might be even just a row of townhouses or something like that, smaller ones that isn't going to break the bank, becomes a viable proposition when the time is right. Because once again, it's the way that you buy it, not just price, but it could be terms and conditions, so early access without trying to overcomplicate it. But also the upside and the mitigation is in and around the one title versus strata title for the future. Sell some, keep some, sell the lot, keep the lot, whatever it may be.
And this is where you can play with delayed settlements, all those sort of things.
Correct.
There. Now, again, being sophisticated a bit over here. And I know what you're going to say next.
I won't actually, because I don't want to sort of paint an illusion that it's that easy. Because it's not.
No, it's not.
It's not. But you're also, remember, we're coming into a market to control multiple streams of income where we're undersupplied.
Yes.
So it is potentially another good opportunity for the prepared investor. Now, there are some people that we've had, some clients that have done it together with their friends, or they've created a unit trust and they all got their own individual roles and that have done so. Now, that is kind of adding another layer of complexity onto something that I wouldn't strongly recommend unless you're really close.
Yep. His goals are different.
Correct. We're talking about joint ventures here,
Yep.
I guess. But it's certainly something that's out there. And once again, those types of properties are usually advertised, not necessarily via the agent. There's a different platform. And once again, relationship driven. And then the last one, Vic, is just don't change and don't overcomplicate what's worked for the last 4 years.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that is
Stick to the fundamentals.
stick to the fundamentals. Forget everything that we've just said where there's potential opportunity, because it's not for everybody once again. But controlling an opportunity today for tomorrow.
Yeah. So I guess, right, so let's take that on its own, in its own isolation, right? So people say, well, you talked about renovation, you talked about mortgagee in possession, you talked about land, you talked about all these opportunities, but I really want to buy and hold, right? I just want a simple house, 4-bedroom, sitting on a nice block in a good area, and I just want to forget about it. The reality of it is that investing is all about medium to long term, right? And yes, we are getting into a market that potentially may go down. And so the argument is that, well, why would I buy now if the market is going to go down? It comes back to lending, right? So the value that you can buy at right now would be much lower than 3-4 months down the track, because the assessment rate for the banks will change. As the cash rate goes up, the assessment rate goes up. So let's say you're able to borrow 800K right now. You may only be able to borrow 650 in 3, 4, 6 months' time. So the reality is that to be able to control a higher priced bracket asset in a different area in comparison to the 650, or it may even be in the same area, but a different property, different type, you got to pull the trigger now.
And once again, as long as you know you can afford
Yes.
it. It's not just about, as we've always said, there are two types of affordability, what you know you can afford and what the bank tells you can afford, and often they're wildly different. But it is all, once again, around finance. It is a game of finance. So that sits at the epicenter of everything, whether it's your personal finance or the bank's finance. If you are the investor that just says, you know what, I am, and we all should be this investor about looking to the long term, because that's what it is, that while I can control the asset,
You will.
because I have my 20-year focus filter, and I can do it today, I will do it today, as long as there's not any undue pressure. But trying to time the market, I'm going to wait to the bottom of the market to get into it, is a fool's game.
Yeah, because automatically you'll be able to borrow less at that point in time.
Correct. And those that pick the dead bottom or the dead top of a market, it's more luck than good management. You want to be somewhere around the top and the bottom if you're a trader, as an example. But plenty of opportunity to come up, Vic, I believe, for the well-prepared. And if you're not prepared, then don't do anything.
Yep.
It's as simple as that. There's no magic formula to it. But I'd be really interested to fast forward a couple of years, re-listen to this particular episode, see how accurate we were in and around, especially around the short-term cycle.
Yeah.
And see where it goes. But
I'd stick my neck out and say we are bang on.
Oh, I know we are. It once again, it's not for everybody though.
Yep.
It's not for everybody at all. All right, there it is, folks. It's where we see the opportunity in the market. But if you really just want to dumb it down and play simple, then just control a good, well-located asset with the right fundamentals, and you will do fine.
Yeah, I guess so after listening to this, perhaps you want to look at the options as to what you need to do, whether you need to sit it out or whether you need to pull the trigger now or prepare to pull the trigger in the coming months. All you need to do is reach out to us. You'll have a chat with Melissa, who's a very seasoned property investor, got a fairly large portfolio. She will make sure that you've got all of your ducks lined up and then set up a time for either myself or Steve to have a chat with you so that we can then map out a strategy, or turn around and say, actually, yeah, I think you need to sit this one out, and then we can go from there.
And that's for our clients as well. You know, all of you that are listening, you know how it rolls. So make sure you do book in the reviews if you haven't had one recently, because it is that time of the year, especially as we're in the end of the financial year and the pre-planning for next. Make sure we do get together and once again go over all the numbers and become forensic and find out what we should and shouldn't do.
No worries. And feel free to share our podcast with your network. That'll certainly help us get the messages out to the broader public. And we'll see you in the next podcast.
Maybe it's a fireside chat. Maybe we can organise ourselves that quickly. I doubt it.
I doubt it.
All right. Thanks for listening, and we will see you next fortnight.
The information featured in this podcast is general in nature, does not take into consideration your financial situation or individual needs, and should not be relied upon. Before making any investment, insurance, tax, property, or financial planning decision, you should consult a licensed professional who can advise whether your decision is appropriate for you.